Ba jiffer seo pípan gan clúich fech na ranneorbe agus gan tchagah fech freiting. Stoch gare fíb fórach in hín agus fíb ulin a érin in jogin is anichte. A cha dúalachas na píbe cúteach an in hua hasing an in Northumbria. Píb veg vín a har a clúich leisiúnach nio balach séji gan an idir le gudar. An program seo has sin je tuil Northumbria agus cúteach jef sin je mach me dhéon pípan eile a ha clechcach balach séji.
Everybody's aware of the Scottish bagpipes, and a lot of people have river dance in Ireland and know the Irish pipes and so on. But really, it was seen as a novelty rather than part of our culture in many quarters. The Northumbrian small pipes that most people will know of now are the closed chanter pipes. They have a parallel chanter where you play the tune and the end is stopped up. This happened somewhere in the last 3 centuries that the end was stopped up in order to mean that when you play the pipes, if you cover all the finger holes, there's no sound comes out unless you open a hole, so you can play very short notes. Highland pipes always have a note sounding because there's always a hole open at the end of the chanter. And they've got the bellows, which of course is the main difference between our bagpipes and many of the other pipes that are played across the world. But that's not to say there aren't bellows elsewhere, such as in France and the Czech Republic and so on. Jamie Allen, who was our first famous piper, and he was a great rogue. He was said to have played 5 different sets of pipes, Irish pipes and the Scottish small pipes and Highland pipes, as well as the 2 Northumbrian pipes. So there are all sorts of them. People just, they tend automatically to think of you know, the Highland pipes that have been taken right across the world by the British Army in the pipe bands there, but there's lots and lots of different instruments.
Ballamorpeth an the Mian Northumberland, agus samaun a hat taitaski a hat taspinnig echteri na piepe fegin huil, agus geshaharach echteri piepe na duche.
I think a lot of visitors to the museum scratch their heads a bit and think, what's a bagpipe museum doing in Morpeth? But they then find out that bagpipes are not specifically a Scottish phenomenon, and in fact that Northumberland is the last place in England which has its own bagpipes. I think a lot of people come here with thinking they know what bagpipes sound like, and they go away with a different view because they can hear the sound of the Northumbrian pipes, but also sometimes the Irish pipes as well. And we've had concerts with people here from all over Europe. If you go back to the early part of the 20th century, there might have only been a handful of players left playing. But sometime in the 70s with the general folk revival, there's a couple of people like David Burley and Colin Ross started making reliable sets of pipes. They were all in tune with each other, so people could play in duets with each other. And there was somewhere people could go and buy a set of pipes.
The 2 types of music we have really are the old core repertoire of the peacock things with the keyless tunes and the variations, and then I suppose that's slightly separate from the more modern tunes that use the keys, the hornpipes, jigs and reels and things that perhaps came into the repertoire a bit later. If you go to a normal session, then you may play at Lads of Annick, which is one of the old tunes, but and then mix that in with some of the more modern ones as well. Obviously, I suppose as musicians moved round, then the tunes moved round with them, and still today that continues. I mean, there's been a big Irish contingent on Tyneside at one point, so you know we also have some Irish tunes as well, but I suppose more from the Scottish side.
There's a common repertoire. The earliest manuscript that we have, which is of a border pipes repertoire, William Dixon of Stamford, his early 18th century manuscript, which was found in Perth Library, incidentally, and it was thought to be fiddle tunes, but it was obvious when they were examined in more detail that they were the pipes repertoire. That was the sort of basis of many of the tunes that are now played on the small pipes. So there's a common currency, but there are divergences as well.
An na dói chanile na dhéanach crunneach William Dixon, crunneach a hach o cwtramach an dólchas na Píp an Northumberland, a lorach an na leorlan an na Pirst. Ha Píperin agus Púst agus bechgan dói an clich a bhí a glús at a rast a rurst, itar skíran agus itar dúchanan fo hús, va tacharst ag a námsin sa tacharst an dú. Ach le dói an siú le dú agus na miangin, is dócha go bhfuil na Cénlaigh sin na slóide agus is dócha na sláiteide.
Bhuaich an gharid ba gannead dhéanneagin i dhéanach fíban agus mar thoraigh ar an sin na píban héin na uras bhí mhór an Northumberland.
We're quite lucky these days because it's much easier to get a set of pipes than it used to be. In the past there were very few sets around, very few pipe makers as well. But I suppose since the 70s the number of professional pipe makers has increased. One pipe maker has produced over 2,000 sets, and there are a lot of, I suppose, full-time pipe makers. So it's actually been able to get the set. All the pipe makers have waiting lists, and I think there are more people wanting to play than there are pipes, which is a good way to be, I suppose.
Suarach na bhain de fíbadan an Northumberland ans na trífichitin, a cha píseach mhór it sin ar an thuochag von Nuorsin.
The traditional pitch of the Northumbrian pipes is round about, I suppose, between F and F sharp, but we also have G chanters now, which allow us to play a lot easier with other types of pipes. I play with the pipes of, I suppose, from 4 different countries as the 4 pipers, with Mick O'Brien playing Ullin pipes and Barnaby Brown playing Scottish small pipes and Francois Lazarevich playing French musette. And for that I use a G chanter, and all the pipes work very well together. I suppose they're all of a similar volume, those pipes, whereas obviously if you have a Highland pipe, then the Northumbrian pipes wouldn't really stand a chance, but with other bellows blown pipes, then you know the volume and the style it has a nice contrast, but they do blend well together as well.
There has to be an awareness that there are still people out there that are the carriers of the tradition, because people that can learn from relative newcomers and not quite have the feel for it. You've got to steep yourself in it all.
I think it's important to keep it going because it's always been a living tradition, the Northumbrian piping tradition. It's really kept going through some low points, but it's probably at one of its high points at the minute. But I think it's important to keep touch with the past as well.
Na de háisich mi clúchin thoiseach, sé fíb fór a bha mi séin, ach na de chhuála mi cúchicin a clúchin na pípe bigge, an a gléis de bha ferris de clechge cúchiri instrumentin eile, húch mi an a gúl lé. Ha drech na pípe bigge alapanich aharachach tronne líntjen, go vi mar a hain dú.
Leis a fíbveic ha vigiad ga séitjug leis an anil, ach vigiad a clechgeg balach héiti cúteoch, agus vaiad na siar le balach séiti, mar a vig an sénatar a pípere a gléag na rivichin chiram, agus vigiad curamach faun na siar mar a vigiad chiram. So mar sin ha na pípere in clúich an úncheáil píp vic agus píp fór, ach ha different traditionen an itar éirin agus sasin agus alapa mar exempla. So mar a bhí a clúich ceol a sasin bhí a clúich an stailétar jaalachte agus charó iad cho jail son a bhí clach grace noting mar ha na grace noting agin an landú. Agus an éirin haid a clach stailich an éile mar krachaning, krachag, shakes, agus so ha stailich in iterialich get a haid a clachig agus a séin an únfórst mar exemplar ha ceol a dul haul srúna moile fat na húne agus ha gach dúich a gra gevéil an ceol sin achgasa.
All heard the great Ulan pipers, Paddy Keenan and Ronan Brown and people like that had been playing, and we'd heard the Northumbrian pipers, but the familiarity with if you like, an indigenous Scottish bellows piping tradition, that had been lost. And in the early 80s, a revived bellows piping movement took off, fueled in part by the Northumbrian pipe makers. They contributed a lot, the sort of technology, the reeds, the style of making the instruments, but also by enthusiasts like Hamish Moore in particular. Once people started looking for these instruments, of course they discovered there were many of them in the old museums, and that was a kind of catalyst to a new age of bellows piping starting here in Scotland. I was playing Highland pipes at the time, but I was interested in the broader sort of sphere of folk music. What could you do with bagpipes and other instruments playing together? There were difficulties integrating Highland pipes into standard folk groups, so when small pipes came along playing in user-friendly keys, in more accessible keys like A and D, that was an interesting route, and that was what kind of drove me in that direction personally. It's taken off in a big way. There's been one thing that did happen in the very early 80s, in 1981, a society to promote bellows pipes in Scotland was started. That's called the Lowland and Border Piper Society. That's an interesting body of, you know, some fairly eccentric and interesting people there, but with one aim in mind, which is simply to promote bellows bagpipes, and particularly in their case to promote the repertoire of the borders, both sides of the border, Northumberland and Scotland. There was a shared musical tradition which is quite distinct in many ways from the Highland bagpipe music tradition in terms of repertoire. So they've been going, there've been loads of pipe makers have appeared on the scene. They're making very good instruments indeed nowadays, both small pipes, which are the little instruments that sound quite like Northumbrian pipes. There's a common ancestry there. But also what you might call lowland pipes. They're also sometimes called border pipes or reel pipes. And these are instruments that sound very like Highland bagpipes. They have a similar style of design. The chanter in particular is a conical bore, and it means it sounds in an octave higher than the small pipes. So it would sound like a scaled down Highland bagpipe. And that instrument too has taken off in a big way. In many ways, indeed, that's the instrument of choice in the last 10 years. And you see a lot of these very attractive but fairly robust sounding instruments being played in modern folk groups like Dive, for instance, with Angus Mackenzie playing.
de hun mee feedback, uiting say shees, le feel de uiting say shees, le kutching in de guitar, uiting say shees, as je like post, en je de piepen de van hem ach she, de Chiùil van hem, as is shin vast zoel, gemaakt moor is farsing, en wegse.
Fwy Rob Wallace ceanart colast in y pibyddoch gymig y feedback eith les ar y fochel mae'r ernstramatch an yn Ribheid Chiùil.
Did a bit of research and got a hold of Francis Collinson's book, The Traditional and National Music of Scotland, and in it had these descriptions of lowland pipes and lowland small pipes. And of course nobody had any of these things, or I'd never heard them but didn't know anything about it. And they sort of fancied the idea of the lowland pipes with the bellows. And I thought that maybe we could get a set going and that would work in the group. And so it proved. At that time there was nobody else that I remember, you know, doing it, and it just seemed to work, you know. It was a reasonable acoustic balance with the fiddles. Other bands had played pipes in the groups, you know, but they'd amplified up the fiddles and the guitars and stuff with the Highland pipes, and that worked as well in a bigger, but we always wanted to be acoustic if we could possibly be. So we went down the road of the border pipes, and that seemed to work all right. At that time there were really very few pipers in folk bands. Now you can hardly find a Scottish folk band without a piper.
Fwy yn jeich plan o ffigyd chafod gyro feedback y clwch idir, inis ha gnóichen eith chynadard gymor.
It really takes us back to the late 1600s, 1700s, where there was a tradition of playing very small instruments, chanters about that length, finger spacing, very tight, often mouth blown, sometimes bellows blown. They were very sweet little instruments. There's a famous set associated with Montgomery's Highlanders, which was a regiment that was formed to fight in the 7 Years' War in North America, the late 1750s. And that was a regiment that, interestingly, had a lot of pipers in it from the Isle of Skye. That lovely old instrument still exists. They were good, I think, for playing and singing perhaps together. Slightly different fingering technique from modern instruments. So when modern instruments took off in Scotland in the early 80s, there was people thought about what would attract players into it, and one thing was to design a fingering system, a scale that would allow Highland pipers to transfer very easily from the Highland bagpipe to the Scottish small pipe. The older style of playing would have been much more similar to a Northumbrian piping technique, where one finger at a time is playing the particular note you're trying to form.
Rim viskar och kart akamors Heyo vicka övergrej Du mager is mag is molk Hei geile man hoort Grapjot ikke fåken blad Lane konne mi år Door vachel Lung kogerij Van big teugen doen en mijn magesken groesken gaat. Oh, ja, wat je nooit aan het tijden gevoerd.
We've moved from the situation where in the early 1980s bellows-blown bagpipes were very rare in Scotland, almost unheard of, to the point where they're just part of the tradition. We can't really call it a revival anymore because they have been revived. Bellows bagpipes are part of the Scottish traditional music scene now.
Na gaan de feedback gaan ik in daar waar. Hapurin gaan de lessen geschaut viaun, a sönisch luch cute, lehich hemisch agus fun muur, janig ne piepen.
My dad was over in Ireland actually, and he first heard uilleann pipes, and he saw them getting played in the pub, and was wondering if there was a Scottish equivalent, and thinking there must be. And at the time we were living in Kennussie, and he came home and told his neighbour all about these pipes that you could play with other instruments and how fantastic it was. And the neighbour didn't say anything at all, but the next day there was a pipe case on the table, and it was a set of Scottish small pipes. So Dad went down to a well-known Northumbrian maker, Colin Ross, and got them checked over and got some reeds for them and got them going. And that was his kind of first foray into the world of Scottish small pipes. And he kind of worked out it was great getting to play with other instruments and fiddles and guitars and the right key and the right volume. And from then he just decided that he would want to make them as well. So since then it's kind of grown, and I joined the business about 98, just finishing off from school, and came in and started working with Dad. And we've got 2 or 3 other people who make parts of the pipes for us, and they come here to the workshop and we do a lot of the reed making and chanters and things like that. The main ones we make would probably be Scottish small pipes, and then we also make a lot of border pipes and reel pipes, which they're all bellows blown, so there's no moisture going into the pipes, so you can use cane reeds with no problems, and they stay very settled compared to the Highland pipes. We've gone down the route of making everything by hand, so the bags are hand stitched and the bellows are all handmade, and we make the reeds all individually, and also the pipes, they're all hand turned, so it's someone standing at a lathe taking the square bit of wood and making it round and shaping it and putting all the holes in, so everything has a bit of somebody going into it. And when the pipes come together here in the workshop with all the different craftsmen who've put part of them themselves into it. I'm going to make a cane drone reed here, and we just start with a bit of bamboo or cane that we got from the south of France, and we're just basically putting a tongue in it. So just cut down here, get rid of all these slivers of cane here. So myself and Dad go down to the south of France quite often, which is a nice trip, and there's a company down there called Ribheid who we get to go and hand pick our drone cane from, and also our chanter cane. I would say the majority of folk have dabbled in Highland pipes at some point. Some are, professional Highland pipers and are looking to add small pipes and border pipes to a band, or but then we do sometimes get folk who've never played before, and actually small pipes are very accommodating in terms of fingering. You can get away with a lot more, and because there's less maintenance involved, and obviously you don't need to blow, that you can kind of get on quite quickly with them, and certainly make a noise quite quickly. So yeah, it's a big mixture really. I think it's lovely hearing other people playing the pipes, and especially when they're singing, and maybe on recordings or things like that. Other professional musicians have recorded with our pipes, and you hear them, and it's just fantastic. And actually sometimes on the radio you can hear a set and you know that it's one of our sets of pipes, which is also great without even looking at them. You can just tell by the noise they're making, and I think that's a lovely feeling. I'm fairly sure that the small pipes and the border pipes came to Scotland at the same time and developed around, at the same time as the Highland pipes. And I'm sure, as is the same today, that back then Highland pipers would have had small pipes or border pipes as well, and played them equally. There's a great quote from an old piper who used to say he loved playing his border pipes. Well, it was actually real pipes. He loved playing his real pipes because he could play them all night and they wouldn't go out of tune, and he could also smoke his pipe at the same time.
Agus mar a chonnig sin leis a fiib voor, gaan aan de waanya tegen jaar te bekken, le torrig na chael zo voor, a hit piepen bekken.
This is a set of Scottish small pipes in the key of A. I've fitted the bag, the cover, the reeds and the valve. You've got a bass, a baritone and a tenor drone. So after this we'll pitch the pipes to 440 hertz. So they're not too far away at that, but they will be perfectly at 440 once I've done the final tuning in a quieter atmosphere. This is just a bit too noisy to tune the pipes.
The beauty of them is that volume-wise they're the same kind of volume as your guitar or fiddle or accordion. They're not like the Highland pipes where you might just drown out. So they're very easy for acoustic folk playing, and they're not so sweet as the small pipes which are drowned out. So they're acoustically compatible and they're in the key of A.